Hey guys, this is Honest Questions, Honest Answers. This is a time to discuss the most difficult questions possibly in your life that you might have personally or questions that you've heard in the world. So we'll start off with, for the first time, we'll talk about what is truth. This is a very difficult question to answer, even though we assume we know what true is, what is false. It doesn't seem difficult. We have the smell test where we know what's true, we know it's false, but most of us haven't reflected on how we know the truth. What is the truth and how we know it? So we'll start with this idea, the situation I was in. So about 10 years ago, I went to Toronto, Canada. I was discussing the gospel with stuff about Jesus with a multitude of people. People from Hindu backgrounds, people from Muslim backgrounds, people from Tibetan Buddhist backgrounds, like the Dalai Lama and stuff like that. Well, here's what happened. One day I was teaching John 14:6, that I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me, where Jesus says that he is the only way to be made right with God. Here's what happened. Teaching little kids, probably like elementary aged, a couple of the older brothers from some of the Hindus were sitting there and listening to me talk about how Jesus is the exclusive way to be made right with God. And they were visibly angry with me. They interrupted me in the middle of my conversation, my discussion, and my teaching and said, how dare you say that what you believe is true and what I believe is false? You have no way to know that. Right. So they said, right, the Hindu system would say that there are a multitude of gods. Pretty much everything is flexible there. So Jesus can be a god, and so can, 1,000 other things. So the question would be, if you were in that situation, Cole, how would you answer that question? If they said to you, how can you be right and I be wrong? How can you claim to know the truth and say that I'm wrong while you're right?
Yeah, my initial thought would be to get it away from Christians versus Hindu or Christian versus XYZ, right? Get away from it like being combative, you're right, I'm wrong. My initial response would be, okay, let's compare it in a big, wide spectrum, like what is truth in general. So practically how I would do this, okay, let's compare like Hinduism to Buddhism, right? No. So geographically, I don't know if this is right, but that should be a religion they're very familiar with. Hinduism, Buddhism, in the same area, right? Even in America. But regardless, if you compare Hinduism to Buddhism instead of Hinduism to Christianity, what is Buddhism? Buddhism is, the world is eternal. There's no, Hinduism is, there's an afterlife, there's salvation by a series of works, where Buddhism is none of those things. Buddhism is the world is eternal, right? So, and that's a very simple summary of those things. But the point is, Hinduism and Buddhism cannot both be right.
Yeah, exactly right.
That is, they are contradicting each other. So by me establishing that there are contradictions in all religions, I can make a comparison to any religion. But the point is, get it off of Christianity. Yeah. Then that means that truth can't be universal. That somebody is wrong, right? Yes. Not everyone can be right. Yeah. So by then establishing that, by establishing that truth can't be many different things, then I can start to make my claim and make my argument for Christianity. Yeah. So there exists in this world contradictory truth claims. The idea A and not A can't be true at the same time, right? Mm-hmm. Like this. Murder can't be right and wrong at the same time, in the same way that Buddhism and Hinduism, Christianity, these all can't be equally valid faith forms, because we're all, even the Hindu is making truth claims about the world that contradict the Buddhist truth claims. So there's a couple different things in our world, especially in American culture, that create barriers to what I would say is a biblical view of truth, right? So the first one is skepticism. This idea that you can't know the truth. You might be able to know the truth about small things, like that I'm here and I'm moving my fingers and I could punch you in the face right. Yeah, I'm alive, right? I can punch you in the face right now. I can drink some water. You can know truth about those things, but the idea is morals and the bigger questions in the world, things about God that you cannot know. Death? What's after death? Because so it would come down to this idea of you would want experiential affirmation
of whatever it was. Otherwise, you would be completely skeptical. So the second thing would be, again, this is a summarized, toned down version of it. The second possibility in our culture that creates a barrier here is individualism. The idea that truth and morality and issues in this world are merely individual preferences. So that, again, this classic statement, I've heard plenty of times, but nobody can live it out. What's true for me is true for me. What's true for you is true for you. It's impossible to live by. So the third one would be relativism. What happens with relativism? Oftentimes people talk about this as individualism.
Which, tell me if I'm wrong, that would be live your truth. Like this truth over here that Joe Blow down the street has can be equally valid as a truth, even though they're completely separate truths. They both can be right. Would that be relativism?
Yeah. So the idea would be is that we can't judge. It's this classic idea. And individualism would be you can't judge anybody for any moral issue at all. This is all subjective experience.
Which I have a thought about 21st century America. Our society today, and correct me if I'm wrong, we live in if you're a Muslim, go ahead.
Yeah.
If you're LGBTQ+, go ahead. If you're Christian, go ahead. Any religion and any worldview is accepted, but how can we live in a society that accepts all religions when not all the religions accept each other?
Yeah, when they're contradicting themselves. So that would be tied into a thing called pluralism. The idea that as if I could pick and choose aspects of different worldviews and religions and just that's good over there, that's good over there, when no.
Imagine if an LGBTQ plus person LGBTQ person said, accept us, right? Yeah. And then there's a Muslim person saying accept us.
Yes.
And there's the arbitrary, I don't know if that's a word, but then there's a government accepting both. But if we really look at being gay in a Muslim religion you can't.
Yes, it's against the Quran.
It is. So how can we be accepting of all when if we analyze each individual thing, they are they are soul truth claims, or they're claiming that their religion is solely true.
Yes, that's right.
So in a way, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. So the thought would be with this issue, and as the United States of America, we're founded on this idea that we are a pluralistic society where we can all coexist in the same space. But what that's moved, right? Coexisting in the same public space is one thing. What's happened though is that they've moved that. Our culture has pushed that towards the idea, these are all equally true, which is impossible. Again, coexisting is one thing. Saying that you're okay to do what you want to do over there while I'm doing this over here. But saying they're all equally true, and if you don't say they're true, if you make the claim that they're false, that it's somehow hate speech, you're canceled or you're hating them. It's like, no, we've always tried to exist as a society. Hopefully, this is the ideal we've sought for, is that we're pluralistic, that we have freedom of religion. The idea is we're not making the claim. The government should not be making the claim. The individual should not be making the claim that all faith positions, whether it's atheistic, again, that's like a position, a worldview position, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, they are not all simultaneously true at the same time. One or many of them has to be false.
And my thought would be to the situation, you're talking in Vancouver to the Hindu.
Toronto,
I'm sorry. If we apply this to that situation, if we can get away from, let's not even talk about Christianity. Let's just talk about this logically. And then if you illustrate what we just said to a person, then you can start making your claims to why Christianity is the most likely. Like in my heart, I feel like this is the most likely worldview that is correct.
Yeah, so reasoning with them would be of value in the sense of like the Hindu would be making truth claims about how the world actually is. That Brahman is the universal God is what the Hindu would claim, and that Brahman manifests himself or herself or itself in all the millions of gods in the world.
Yeah,
that is a truth claim, right? Yeah. That contradicts the idea that there is one God who created all things.
Yeah.
Those simultaneously can't be true at the same time. Right. Yeah. So the last one is relativism, and this would be a cultural issue. This is very, very more common. I would say this is more common in the individualism idea. That the idea is that your culture and your language, and again, whether it's larger culture of your country or smaller culture of your family or the region you're like in the United States that you're a part of, determines your values. And we assume there's part of this that is true. Like if you grew up in the South in the United States, that you're going to have certain things that you say, certain things that you probably like, foods that you like, and language that you use.
If you grew up in India, you'd probably be Hindu. If you grew up in China, you may be atheist. If you grew up in America, you may be evangelical.
Yeah, very much likely so. But does the issue with that would be not only morality, but truth claims are dependent solely on the culture. Well, what that says is basically there is no objective morality, there's no objective truth out there that a society could be judged by. So the classic example is always, forever and always, the Nazis. Just because a culture say it's okay to exterminate a people doesn't mean it's true. That's the extreme version. But again, let's get more practical, everyday version. Stealing, right? If there was a culture that exists, which has existed plenty of times in the past, that did not believe in the right to private property, which the United States does, that you can own private property, right? It's your possession. If you lived in a culture where there was no private property, and if that person from that culture went into our culture and just said, hey, there's your wallet, there's your phone on the table, I can take that because there's no such thing as private property, you would be offended and angry. You don't want people to take your $1,200 phone, iPhone 46 Max. You don't want people to take. You don't want people to take that. But the idea, if it's solely culturally determined, if morality is solely culturally determined, the person who grows up with no concept of private property does not have the right, in my opinion, to take your phone. Right? It's objectively wrong because you bought that. Hopefully, you bought that and you possess that. So you have to have some kind of objective moral and objective ideal truth out there.
So let me summarize this up in one sentence, if that's even possible. Can truth be objective? Is that?
Yeah. So that's the next question.
Okay. Sorry.
No, you're right. The next question is that we need to define what truth is. Yeah. How do you define truth? So what do you think? Put you on the spot here. What do you think that the normal person, and whether it's you personally, or what do you think? How do you think people in our world would define truth, or at least in our culture?
In our culture, how I feel people define truth would be, I think it's more than one thing. You can't just point to one thing, but one would be your experiences. As we've talked before, that changed me. A lot of people have like these encounters, these good or bad things. Man, I was doing bad things and I got in a car wreck and that straightened me out. Right? That's just one example. But your experience shapes your worldview, right? One could be just logic, like, I read this text and I thought through it. Like, my mom and dad believe something, so I'm gonna take a hard look at, my beliefs probably line up with what they believe. But what I believe is the Bible's truth. Right? I mean, that's why we're here, right? And I believe it's truth because, and this is what you told me one time, so I'm stealing it right now, but that this book has many different reasons why it's, validated. One would say inerrancy, right? That it proves itself true, prophecies, 66 different authors, all that. But for me, it's that this book diagnoses the state of my soul better than any other worldview, anything other like that. So it's a personal, intimate connection that I have with Jesus Christ. So that's where my truth comes in, along with inerrancy, along with, logically reasoning with, these big questions, these big life questions, what's after death, sin issues, right? And then, even, I would like to say a small fraction would be like the validity of the book, like how many manuscripts, all that. But that the biggest thing would be how it diagnoses my soul. Yeah.
So on a more philosophical level, there's two big theories of truth. One is the correspondence theory. The other one is the coherence theory, right? Mm-hmm. The first one would be that what is true is what corresponds to reality. So the idea would be is that whatever exists and is real in the world is what is true, right? The difficulty would be is how do you put your finger on things like love, How do you think, like, with goodness and like truth, goodness and beauty? How do you get your finger on like love, kindness, gentleness, sacrifice, right? How do you put your finger on that? With correspondence theory, you would need concrete examples. The other theory would be the coherence theory, which is the idea that you don't want to make claims about the world that are contradictory. Right, it's simple enough, right? That again, saying that murder is right and murder is wrong in your worldview, those both can't be true at the same time. So you have to work through what's true and what's false, and not let it contradict itself. So you can't sit there and say that, well, murder is right and murder is wrong. It would not cohere with one another.
Give me a better practical example, because I think a lot of times majority of people say murder is wrong, right?
Yeah.
What about, could you put, homosexuality in that category?
You just go right to the heart, the difficult things.
Yeah,
so
I'm cutting right out.
So again, like reasoning wise, I think there's this larger argument about what the purpose of things like marriage are, what the purpose of relationships are.
But specifically, like, it can't be right and wrong.
You can't be right and wrong, and that would be the issue. Is that so? This comes to the next thing. So here's the real problem: whether it's correspondence, coherence. The hope would be that you would have both, right? That what you believe and what you believe is true corresponds to reality, is actually true, but it also doesn't contradict itself. Well, here's what's happened. So that's kind of going out the window as far as morality goes. This is my answer to your homosexuality question. Again, you're just going right at it right here. Yeah. So the homosexuality question. Here's what happened: is there's this idea of the two spheres. A woman named Nancy Pearcey and Chuck Colson and Francis Schaeffer talk about this idea, where what's happened in our cultures, we have cordoned off our life, moral issues, truth issues, into two different spheres. We would say the scientific is objectively true, and we would say the moral, the religious, the ethical, the ideas of beauty, goodness, truth, those are all like personal experience and stuff like that. Those are all subjective, right? There's no objectivity over here. There's complete objectivity over here. So biology is where you find truth, not whether something's morally right or wrong. Homosexuality is morally right or wrong, or sex outside of marriage is morally right or wrong. That's not where you find it at. You can't know that. It's a skepticism towards that kind of thing. So there's two spheres. They would say that the moral is completely, and the religious is completely subjective, and the scientific is completely objective, right? And I would argue that that is a unbiblical, untenable, unlivable framework. Because I assume when you go to the grocery store, or when you decide, because for example, you decide who you're going to date, I assume you don't use her biological. She's 6'5". She probably got good,
genes.
She got good genes.
That's why I'm picking my wife, because she has good genes.
Yeah, well, once she finds that out, she's probably not going to be very happy with you in the first place, right? So for her, if you went up to a girl, this is what I'm saying, right? If you went up to a girl and you're like, man, you're beautiful, like you're absolutely beautiful, and they respond, it's like, well, how do you determine beauty? It's like, well, okay, this is completely subjective. There is no standard of beauty ever in the world, right? It just doesn't even exist. It's all subjective. I just feel like you look good, right? And then you say this. Let's say you keep on dating them, and let's say you address that over time. You start writing poems to her, and it's like how symmetrical your face is. I love that your eyes are I don't even know how big your eyes are, but 3 inches in diameter. That's pretty big eyes, probably. It's way too big eyes.
Maybe like an inch.
Yeah, an inch in diameter. Your nose is perfectly fit in your face. That might be, you might have a girl that might like that. She's still going to think it's strange. But even then, you keep on pushing, and you eventually say you love that person. Yeah. And you say this to them, that love is merely a brain chemical response to my sexual desire for you.
I think that's.
Oh, that's how romantic! You're so romantic.
Get on the knee right there, man. Just
you're so romantic right there. We want to say there are objective things like beauty. Yeah. Again, like how we get at that is more difficult, but there are objective things like love. Love exists. Again, it's hard to pin it down really easily in an easy definition, but we believe love exists, and that it is not merely a subjective feeling. When you see a parent lay their lives down for their kids, that's love. It's not, you can't prove that by doing an empirical test. You can't sit there and put it in a lab, right? That kind of love, you cannot put it in a lab. You cannot
prove it with numbers.
Yeah, you can't merely do it with numbers. It will not attain to that. It will not. You will not be able to measure it with in a laboratory setting where you put a beaker up and you pour something into a beaker. You just cannot ever do it scientifically. But how terrible would it be if your girlfriend or your wife or your boyfriend, whatever it would be, if you told them love doesn't exist? It's merely a brain chemical response. Like, your natural reaction is like, well, okay, maybe I'll believe that, but tell my wife, because you know it's untenable, it's unlivable to say that love doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And so here's the idea: is we've taken these two spheres and we said, okay, love is completely subjective, science is completely objective. This is an unlivable worldview. Unlivable world, and this is my answer to your homosexuality thing. What we've said is sexuality is completely subjective. That's a completely subjective opinion. When in reality, we want to say there is an objective truth to what sex is made for, what relationships and marriage is made for. That corresponds to a reality outside of ourselves. That there's a standard.
So what even if you take these subjective that the world classifies it as, this love, right? Maybe I feel love is between a female and a female, or a man and a man.
Yeah.
Well, then you take that and then you also combine it with this objective science, right? Male and female are made biologically certain ways. So you can take, I believe they're both objective, obviously, because I believe in the Bible, right?
Yeah.
But I think that is the answer to the question is, you take, there's no such thing as, both are subjective, or this is a subjective, this is not. Everything, it's a you always say both and.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a both and that's the thing, is that I would say that science is not it is a science, but it's not monolithic. What I mean by that is that, like, when again, I see Bill Nye say this all the time. Well, science says this. No, science says scientists in a certain area of expertise say a certain thing.
Stated this.
Right? That would be a more appropriate thing. Again, the physicist, no matter how much he wants to be an expert in science, is probably not likely qualified to be a medical doctor. You probably wouldn't. Again, you go to surgery one day, you need your appendix taken out. It's like, well, I'm a scientist. It's like, oh, awesome, you're a scientist, like, so you know how to do this. It's like, well, not really. I'm a physicist.
I'm more a theorist.
Yeah, I'm a theorist here. I'm a theoretical physicist here. Yeah. I'm not a biologist and a surgeon.
I'm like an Aristotle with science.
Exactly right.
Socrates with science.
So again, like, science is not monolithic in the sense it's like it's not one size fits all. So the physicist would likely not be an expert in human anatomy, right? Biology, like biological sciences. So all I said, it's not monolithic. So there is room for theories, and there's room for working things out and trying to seek the truth still to this day is an area of progress. And I'd say the same thing for the moral aspects of things. The what we call subjective aspects of things, we don't have all the answers perfectly, just like we don't have all the answers in science. Right? We are seeking the truth in our lives in the best way possible. And this is where I get, in my opinion, this is where the Bible comes in. Right?
I think, I just had a thought now. I think it would be naive of us Christians to go up to people who may be atheists, who maybe believe in science, maybe have these different worldviews as us, and go up to them and say, you are stupid for not believing the Bible.
Yes.
This is objective, right? Well, for us, we have come to the point of understanding that it is objective. But when we are evangelizing, we're talking to people, there is reasoning. We can't scientifically, with numbers, prove God is real. We can't point to this. We have creation. We have these things, right? Yeah. But it takes reason, logic, working things out, and appealing to your heart, your senses. It's a lot that goes into.
Yes. So it's a whole human thing, right? That you want to appeal when it comes to us saying what is truth. What I'm going to say here in a minute is that, like, the idea is that we believe that God is the standard of truth. He is the one who is always true. He is the one, the reason we have truth in this world, because there's an objective, moral, and objective, logical standard outside. He's not merely that. He is our loving, good creator who truly loves us. He's not merely just some force outside of us, but like, he is the standard and the source of truth, is what the Bible claims. Again, so this is the thing, is that you want to say, oh, well, you're just putting this into the subjective category where it's not science. It's like, well, the issue would be is that if you're going to claim that, you're going to have to dismiss a couple things. You're going to dismiss at least 2/3 of the world, or if not more than that. The percentage of atheists in the world is very, very small in comparison to the other world, other religions and stuff like that. One, you're dismissing almost everybody in the world as a fool. One, and two, again, what you're going to have to claim if all things that you can't touch, feel, or taste, only if I could touch, feel, or taste it, it's true, right? Again, love goes out the window, goodness goes out the window, beauty goes out the window, joy goes out the window.
Animals then.
We're just purely chemically driven animals, and it's unlivable.
Yeah.
So what I would say the reaction should be is what the reaction for the person who is seeking truth, right? And this is why I say this is a holistic thing. I really appreciate you saying that holistic idea is that we want to appeal to emotions, we want to appeal to reason, we want to appeal to experience, we want to appeal.
We're not trying to sit up here and say you should stop believing in science. You should stop believing in your emotions because it is everything.
Yes, everything. Right. And again, I think that ultimately, when it comes down to it, is that science would line up with the Christian worldview. Yes, would help us along the way. But those are kind of an asides there. But the bigger, larger cultural thing is how you address this would be. I don't think you can merely reason somebody into a relationship with Jesus. Mm-hmm. Right? As the same way that I don't think you can emotionally drive or emotionally manipulate into somebody with a relationship with Jesus. Mm-hmm. Again, both extremes are wrong in my opinion. So the challenge would be, and my challenge for whoever's listening would be to test the waters. Right? There's two different passages that I point to with this idea. One would be John 6:66. I'll just read it to you. After this, so Jesus basically says like some really hard things. He says this phrase, "Eat my flesh and drink my blood."
And he just drops the mic.
He just drops the mic, and like people are like, "Oh gosh, this guy's kind of crazy." Yeah. And he was talking about ultimately his death and resurrection is what he's talking about. But this is what he said. So a lot of people who were following him ran away basically, and it says, verse 66. After this, many of his disciples turned back and no longer walked with him. Jesus said to his 12 disciples, the people who were following after him, "Do you want to go away as well?" Simon answered him, "Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life." So here's what if I'm talking to somebody who's skeptical or like struggling with the idea of God being real, and lives in this world where science is objective and morality and religion are all subjective, what I would say is test the waters. Like read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John for yourself. And I think you'll see this idea. To whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. And we have believed and come to know that you are the Holy One of God. The picture would be is I think that the scripture plays itself out. The Bible plays itself out when you test the waters about who Jesus is and what he has done. There's no better, I want to say story, but I'm not saying story in the fictional sense. There's no better offer in our life with things like truth, goodness, and beauty, with our purpose in life, what we were made for, and what diagnoses the real problems in our world. I think Jesus does it better than anybody ever.